Hi friends, Krista here. Thanks for stopping by Books and Jams. I'm so glad that you are here today. And if you're new here, welcome. Today I'm going to be doing the next episode in my Reading Like a BookTube Friend project. At the beginning of the year, I created a spinner wheel with 12 of my BookTube friends on it, and each month I'm picking one of the names, and I'm choosing a handful of books to read like that booktuber. This has been a really good project so far. I've read some things out of my comfort zone. I've read some things in my comfort zone. For the most part, I've been able to read off of my shelves. And this month, well, in August, I chose Lindsey from Lindsey's Little Library. She is one of my BookTube besties, and so I thought it appropriate to wear one of my besties' shirts today. And I had a lot of fun talking with Lindsey and picking out the books that I was going to read like her. I had one already chosen. As soon as I chose the 12 names, I have a little small stack of books that I already know are books that I have on my shelves because of these BookTube friends. And the book that I have on my shelf specifically because of Lindsey is The Life We Bury by Alan Eskins. I have heard Lindsey talk on and on about this book. She absolutely loves it. And I picked it up because of her. And when I first picked it up, I don't even think I could have told you what it's about. In looking at the summary on the back, I do know that this is going to be a little bit historical, a little bit of a mystery. We follow a college student who gets connected with a convicted murderer and starts to learn about Carl's life and has questions about whether or not he was wrongly convicted or if he was rightly convicted. So I know that there's going to be a little bit of a historical element because we're going to get Carl's backstory, and I think Vietnam War plays a part in that. But I just know that Lindsey really likes this book. So I added this to my list for sure. And then in thinking about Lindsey's reading, we do have a lot of overlap in historical fiction. And so I wasn't sure I was going to do a lot of historical fiction. This does have a little bit of a historical element to it, but I also know that Lindsey loves thrillers. I don't have loads of thrillers on my shelves, but when I was talking to Lindsey, we decided that I'm going to read The Last Flight by Julie Clark. She gave this book 5 stars and absolutely loved it. I think this is about 2 women who kind of change places at the airport. They make a last minute decision. 2 women make a last minute decision to switch tickets, and they travel as the other person to kind of get a little escape from their life, I guess. But then one of the planes, I think, goes down. So what is the woman who has the other one's ticket? Like, what is she going to do now? So I know Lindsey loved this. This is on my shelves, and I'm going to read it. I'm going to read a thriller. I don't read a lot of thrillers, but I think this one sounds like it could be really good. And I know Lindsey loves it. So we're going to give it a chance. And then we had a hard time, Lindsey and I, talking about like what else I could read like her. Did I want to go the historical fiction route? Did I want to do another thriller? She doesn't really read a lot of middle grade, so that eliminates my whole middle grade shelf. She reads a tiny bit, but not really. So we just talked through a couple different options, and then it hit me like a light bulb one day. I'm like, oh my word, I know exactly what I need to read. I need to read a Jodi Picoult book. Because you love Jodi Picoult, Lindsey. And she does. Lindsey has read maybe everything or almost everything that Jodi has written. She used to have a whole ton of Jodi Picoult books. I think she's since gotten rid of quite a few, but she loves Jodi P and has seen her in person multiple times. Like, she loves Jodi Picoult. So I don't have very many on my shelves. Actually, maybe just 1 or 2. I've read Small Great Things and I loved it. I read The Storyteller and I loved it, but I've read others and had a hard time getting into them. So Jodi Picoult is not an author that I reach for quickly, but I did have one that I've hauled this year, I believe, and that's Plain Truth. And I am excited about this because it takes place in Lancaster County, where I lived for 6 years. And it deals with Amish people. There's a baby that's born and dies right away. And then there's a young woman who's suspected of being the mother of the baby and potentially the murderer of the baby. And so we have the lawyer involved. We have family members who've been banned. We have the boyfriend. Is he the father? Like, we have all of these other elements. And something that Jodi is kind of known for is making you think. I like that. And so I'm excited to read this Amish kind of mystery, courtroom drama set in Amish country in Lancaster. Lancaster County. It's not actually in Lancaster itself, but it's outside of Lancaster in the town of Paradise, which I know my hairdresser used to be in Paradise. So I am very excited. I'm very excited to read this. So those are my 3 Read Like Lindsey books: The Last Flight by Julie Clark, The Life We Bury by Ellen Askins, and Plain Truth by Jodi Picoult. So I will hop on here when I read these and let you know what I thought about them. And then we'll see if I like Lindsey's choices. I know Lindsey does typically read a little bit grittier and darker than I like to read, and I have a feeling some of these could potentially get a little more gritty and darker than I normally read, but I'm also very excited about them. So stay tuned. So I have already finished my first Lindsey book, as I said, and I'm really excited that I finally read The Life We Bury. Holy moly. Lindsey had talked about this quite a few times, and I really enjoyed this. I ended up giving this one 4 stars. We follow a college student who, for a school project, has to write a biography of an elderly person in his life. Our young man doesn't really have anyone like family or neighbor or anything that he can interview. So he ends up just kind of walking into a nursing home and asking them if there's someone there who he could interview. And they set him up with this man, Carl, who is out on parole because he's dying of cancer, but he had been convicted of raping and murdering a teenage girl like 30 years before, or something like that. And at first, our kid Joe is like, what? But then he's like, oh, this might be kind of interesting to get to talk to this guy. And he does. He's able to talk with him and learns Carl's story of being a soldier in Vietnam. He learns about his growing up life, and he learns about his relationship with this neighbor family of this girl who was brutally murdered. It was awful. And so Joe, in learning about Carl's story, is not convinced that the conviction was real. And so he and a friend of his from across the hall begin to kind of dive deep into Carl's story. At the same time, Joe is dealing with a mother who is kind of a deadbeat. She is constantly getting drunk and causing issues, and he has a younger brother who's on the autistic spectrum and often has to kind of take responsibility for his little brother. But he just wants to be at college and be a normal college student, but he's dealing with all of this family stuff as well. So these 2 storylines are going on at the same time, and I really, really liked both of them. The only thing that I didn't love, I understood by the end why it needed to be there, but there was a romantic interest with this girl across the hall that kind of dives into Carl's story with him. So between Joe and this girl across the hall, I didn't really care about the romance. I didn't think it was necessary at all until we get to the end. And I'm like, oh, okay, I get that. But yeah, I feel like it wasn't really needed. But I'm so glad that I finally read this. I was very invested. I think I read the whole thing in about a day and a half, listened to it on audio. The audio was really good. And it is a little grittier than what I would normally read. Lindsey does read books that are a little darker and grittier than I do. So that fits, it tracks. There is some language in here, but it didn't feel gratuitous. It felt like realistic situations where someone might curse, and that is what happens for sure. So there's some language. There's definitely a little bit of graphic descriptions of Carl's time in Vietnam and the death of this young teenage girl. There are just a couple characters in here that are like, whoa, you would not want to encounter them in real life. The mom, too, a little bit of domestic situations, abuse with the mom and her boyfriends and with the autistic brother. And yeah, so it's a little bit grittier than what I normally read. So be aware of that. If you're someone who takes recommendations from me, this one's a little bit darker and grittier, but if you can handle those things, this would be a good book. I thought the writing was great and the story itself was interesting and compelling. So I'm glad that I read this like Lindsey, finally, yay. All right, I'll be back to talk about the next one when I finish it. All right, I have finished my 3rd Read Like Lindsey book, and I realized I haven't come on to talk to you about the second one. So the second one I read was Plain Truth by Jodi Picoult. I really enjoyed reading this. It takes place in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, which is a place where I lived for 6 years, and I love Lancaster County. And so reading about the Amish in Lancaster was very fun for me because I saw some of the some of it firsthand, but from the Englisher side of things. So this story follows the death of a baby in an Amish barn, and one of the family members is suspected of it, and then it goes to trial and the whole 9 yards, which is so unheard of in the Amish community. And so it's a lot of talk about, could she have even done this, and why is she even being suspected of this? Like, there's just so much talk about the Amish side of things, and I really, really loved that. I loved Katie, our young Amish girl that we follow, as well as Ellie. Ellie is her lawyer who ends up having to live on the farm with Katie as part of the plea bargain or the deal. I don't know the legal terms, but as part of the deal of her not having to spend the time in jail until the trial, she's kind of like house arrest at home, and the lawyer Ellie has to live with her. And so she's like smack dab in another culture ultimately, and how that impacts her and her relationships. And I just really, really enjoyed this. And just like in true Jodi fashion, you kind of question your snap judgments about things. And then she lays some stuff on you near the end that I was like, whoa, okay. I was not expecting that at all. Maybe I should have predicted a few of the things that I saw towards the end, but I did not. I was just in it for the ride. I get so connected to characters, and Jodi does a great job at telling this story. I did not find myself bored. It is a little bit of a chunkier read, just over 400 pages, but it's not, it didn't feel super long. I did really, really enjoy this. I'm not saying that I'm going to run out and pick up more Jodi Picoult. I think one of the reasons that I really loved this was the Amish factor. So I'm glad that I read it though. And I don't know what I rated it for, maybe 4 stars, 4.5. I don't know. It was really good. And then just today I finished The Last Flight by Julie Clark. This is a thriller, which is very much a part of Lindsey's reading. And in this one, we follow 2 women who very near the beginning are in the airport together, and they decide to exchange tickets. They're both running from their lives. And the one woman, we had a little bit of buildup, so we know what she's running from. And then structurally, the book is very interesting because the second woman, it goes back to about 6 or 7 months before the flight. And we kind of follow her story leading up to that day where they decide to change tickets and take each other's flight and escape from their lives. You do learn very quickly that one of the flights crashes. So one woman's plan to escape doesn't exactly work out. And so it's just the story of these 2 women and what happens to them, and 2 women in crisis moments of their lives and what leads up to that crisis moment. I liked it because although I don't typically love a domestic thriller, and some of the events in these women's lives were along those lines, it was more focused on these women and how they, number one, survived the life that they had been living, and also what they were doing to change it and how they decided to step up and out of that life. So it was really about these women and their agency and what they were going to do about the situations that they were in. So it was a little bit thrillery, but it wasn't scary thrillery. So I like that. I didn't want to be scared. I didn't need to be scared, but it was kind of intense. It was definitely intense. And I just wanted people to step into their lives and befriend these ladies because they really needed some really solid friends. Whether or not that happened, you'll have to read the book. So this was a really good thriller. It's definitely my kind of thriller. Yes, there was a little bit of language, but I don't even remember there being that much language in here, and definitely no graphic sex scenes or violence or anything like that. There's a few scenes that borderline some violence, but nothing that was too much for me. So I would say, these were all really good reads. Yeah, I really liked all 3 of them, but I think I'm going to put The Life We Bury as my favorite. That historical element plus the mystery, I really liked this. Turns out this is the first in a series. Someone told me potentially there's 9 books in the series. What? I'm totally fine just reading this one. I may have said that already, but yeah, I just am fine with reading this one. I don't really plan on continuing the series, but I really liked this one. And then we have Plain Truth by Jodi. I think because of my connection to Lancaster County, I really liked this, but then I really did like this thriller as well. So these will probably be tied for second, but this one is definitely my favorite of the three. So there it is, my Read Like Lindsey project. Huge success, reading 3 books off of my shelves that I have been wanting to read. But there you go, my Read Like Lindsey project is done. I can move on to Mitzi. I would love to hear your thoughts on any of these books. If you read them, what did you think of them? Did you enjoy them? Are you somebody who needs to read like Lindsey as well? Follow her, Lindsey's Little Library. Let's chat down in the comments. I always love talking with you down there. And that's going to be it for today. Thank you so much for watching. I look forward to chatting with you in another video very soon. Bye.